I've seen some of these bikes and they've got the resistance on them. I think what I'm hearing from you is the resistance isn't as important as the motion.
The motion, yeah. Again, you can get a little bit of resistance to have a little pushback to get the fluid to circulate, but what's important is the motion. The more motion, the better. And anyone who's had arthritis or all, the warmer the joint gets, the more movement going, the better that they feel. What they don't realize is that pain relief is from fluid movement inside the joint.
Well, the reason I was asking that question is I belong to a health club, and I see a new baby boomer every day. They tell me there's 100,000 new baby boomers coming on every single day.
Yeah.
And they all seem to, and I have been guilty of this, want to go back to when they were in their 30s. There, you see them much, much more active. So what I see there is they think that more is best. So the higher the resistance, the more weight. And then what I also observed is it seems like then they're not there for a while because they created an injury.
Yeah, you always have to take what's called a step-by-step approach or a gradient approach to anything. You have to evaluate where that person's at and bring them up one little level at a time. Yeah, of course, when if the person's operating at this level and they want to go to that level overnight, you're asking yourself for trouble. It's always a step-by-step approach and always monitoring what's going on afterwards. And again, that's a predictable way to get someone better as opposed to just, let's throw this in the mix and hope and see if it gets any better.
Right.
Again, that's really for the novices that do that sort of thing.
Makes sense. So sometimes less is best.
So oftentimes, exactly. A lot of times you have to backtrack to find out what the person is doing because a lot of times they're typically doing too much or maybe even too little of what they're doing in order to get better. But let me just go back to the swelling again because we're talking about swelling inside the joint. What's even more important is that in this model, we'll go back to that capsule again. And I just want to give you a little background. That capsule is made of folds like a curtain. When a curtain comes together, it folds, and then when it stretches out, it stretches out. Well, every joint is that way. In the knee joint, you have a capsule around the front that when it comes straight, those folds come together. And when it bends, those folds bend.
That makes sense.
And on the back, it's the opposite. When the leg is straight, those folds straighten out, and when they bend, they come together. Well, what happens is, how this all occurs is, once again, inflammation gets set up for whatever reason, whether it's straining, arthritis, whatever it is, and those folds stick together. That fluid penetrates the folds of the capsule and sticks those folds together. So now it can't move because those folds are stuck together, and you can actually feel it in the knee, on both sides of the knee where those folds are stuck together. Now, there's a condition called a Baker cyst, and that is not truly a cyst, but it's really a fluid-filled part of the back of the knee.
I have a lot of friends that have that, and they've gone all over the place looking for help, including lots of physical therapists, but it never seems to give them any relief.
Yeah, and it depends on what stage they're in. But what the mechanism is the fact that the fluid has been entrapped in those folds and has not been treated, so it gets worse and worse and worse. It gets, again, back to the same idea. It gets thicker and thicker and harder and harder. And so now it's no longer a thin fluid, it's a thick fluid, becomes gel-like, and it can even calcify. It actually become calcium. So at that point, yeah, they might need to have it excised, but before that happens, there's so much that can be done. And that's just one thing, but those folds are all over the knee, the back of the knee, the front of the knee. So in order to give someone relief, what we do is get rid of those folds around in the front and in the back. And it's like peeling the layers of an onion, right?
Okay.
That's the top layer that we get rid of. So now the skin and the folds can move properly.
So it's almost like the curtains, like when they're all bunched up, and then you want to bring them back down.
That's right. And how do we do that? Well, we need enough pressure by just direct pressure onto those folds to release them. Now, it's not a comfortable thing to do, but after a while, they'll say, oh my God, that's gone. Well, because it's all flattened out. There has been enough force applied to those folds, enough to really release them for getting relief. And then they'll come back and they're just happy as clams because that swelling has been released. They can move the joint the best that they can. So that's one step. The other step is this. Swelling can occur within the tendons of the knee. Now the tendons attach bone to muscle. Okay, you got this what's called a tendon. They come in all shapes and sizes. Now what happens when a knee gets stiff, okay, and it can't move, the muscle tissue bunches up, like you're saying with the curtain. But the muscle tissue now, when it tries to contract, is stuck in this position.
Okay.
So what that does is it pulls on its own tendon. And it strains the tendon from the bone because the tensile strength of the muscle is much stronger than the tendon.
Wow.
So, and this will produce swelling too. So we get rid of the swelling around the tendon and they feel so much better. So there's more to this swelling issue to resolve, but this is the first step, getting rid of that swelling, and they'll feel 100% better, but they just got through the first step.
Okay.
The second step goes back to what I'm telling you about with the muscle. Those muscles are stuck because the body will form in the direction which it's used, right?
Okay.
Everything.
Okay.
The muscle only contracts, meaning it only comes together. It does not uncontract. It does release, but by doing repetitive movement and sustained contraction, it gets stuck. You ever hold on to a handle for a while? Like a shovel?
Or a better one for me is I'm on a long trip and I got my hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty soon I got to have relief.
Yeah, what are you going to do naturally? You're going to just take your hand and go, oh, that feels so much better.
Exactly.
You're not going to walk around with your hand fisted
or
like that.
doing this.
Right. But that happens throughout the whole body.
Okay.
So that if that is not detected, that muscle will not release until you get direct pressure on it or stretch it slowly. Because inside that muscle is a sensor called a muscle spindle whose job is to detect what are called acceleration and deceleration forces. So they attach to the legs so that we're not walking around like puppets on a string, just kind of gangling. So it helps dampen the flow of movement so it's a nice even flow when we start motion and we start motion. But when that muscle has been in a shortened state, it's not going to give it up because every time it feels movement, it's going to hold on to that position and going to make the tendon work more and the muscle less. You see the problem there? So the next step is to release the muscle tissue around the joint. And that can be done many different ways. It can be done manually. It can be done by stretching. But the point is it's got to be on the muscle belly, not on the tendon. We don't want to overstretch the tendon because it's already in a position where it's overstretched. We want to get directly into the muscle belly and all forms of the muscle, get all around it. And in the knee, those muscles are usually the top muscle called the quadricep that sits on top, the hamstring that sits on the bottom, and the calf muscle that sits there. So we really want to release that muscle so now the muscle strength can be there. And that, by the way, is the quickest way to increase strength. If you want to increase your strength, stretch the muscle from this position to this position. And that's exactly what happens.
Wow, that's interesting because it seems contradictory because I used to lift weights a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm lifting the weights thinking that I'm accomplishing that, but I could do it without doing a lot of weight by just stretching. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple ways to increase strength. Your way is to increase resistance, which, by the way, of course, is going to work because the body will form in the direction which is stretched. So when you add resistance, the muscle will get bigger. The fibers of the muscle will get bigger and produce strength. But there is an optimal length for that muscle to be in. If it's stuck like this, it can only contract a little bit. If it's stretched out to its resting position here, you see how much more strength you'll have?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's a matter of both strengthening and stretching tissue. What I have seen is most people, particularly guys that want to become athletes and that sort of thing, don't spend anywhere time in stretching the muscle tissue. But when they know it's going to increase their strength and performance, you got to convert at that point.
It's really interesting to say that because at the health club, they're always saying stretch a lot before, stretch a lot afterwards, but they never really tell you what stretch is.
Yeah, it's so important that stretching is done. And because, again, it's going to improve the joint function. It's going to take the pressure off the tendons. It's going to make it stronger. and it does all those functions to it. You know, like people do yoga and all that. They're stretching.
So let me ask you this question. This is really interesting what you've been sharing with us. How come we don't see this anywhere else?
You want
And I don't mean to put you on the spot.
no, I'll tell you my point of view,
Okay?
and it's
Because
not.
I know that our listeners are interested in saying, well, nobody has ever talked about this or showed me this stuff.
Yeah.
Why?
I will say this, and again,
And I want to qualify this because you've taught at one of the major universities in Michigan, Wayne State University, which is very well respected there. So I'm just interested.
well, I'll tell you what I've experienced and what I've seen is the fact that when you go to a physical therapy clinic, you're getting paid based upon what you do, not on your outcomes.
Okay.
So if you can make just as much money throwing a hot pack on someone and doing an ultrasound or having them go through some motion, rather than spending the time to educate the person and do some of the manual work that's necessary and continue on doing that, you're getting rewarded the same amount, whether you get outcomes or not.
I got you.
I mean,
That's the world we live in now, isn't it? That's really interesting.
that's all I've seen is the fact that that's
I'm
happening.
going to ask you a couple things that I did a little research on you, and I found out that you're creating a relationship with Lawrence Tech University, which in my research, I didn't realize that they were ranked as the number 65 university in the Midwest, which
Yeah.
is pretty good there. And they're well known for their engineering programs, their biomedical programs, and
Right.
their robotic programs. But I understand that you are in conversation and working in concert with them to create a biomedical device
Right.
that can be used in the clinic and another one that can be used at home to assist us in doing this. If you
Yeah.
could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. After you get rid of the swelling, after you get the muscles stretched out, you're on to the third step. And that's what this device does. You're now down to the area of the tissue that has these deep tissues that are holding that joint out of position. And what happens is, it will happen in every joint. I guarantee you, this is the bottom of the joint. That joint will start displacing itself like this and backwards.
Okay.
And so once you get through the swelling and once you get through the connective tissue, now you're into the deeper tissue, and there's just no way a person can do that to themselves. So the device actually is putting the joint back in position in 2 dimensions so that it's actual going back to its ideal alignment. But in order to do that, you need a sustained amount of force applied and a stretch applied in order for that to happen. I don't expect someone to do that to themselves.
Well, that's really exciting what you got going, and maybe in the future we'll have you come back and give us a little update on that. I'm sure that some of our audience is saying, boy, I've never heard of any of this stuff. How can they reach you?
Well, they can call the Institute in Regenerative Medicine